Welcome to Focus Within. In this video, I'm going to talk about when and how to abstract components from Tailwind CSS utilities. One of the first questions popping up when working in a utility-first approach is how to handle those masses of CSS classes you add to your markup and how to avoid repetition of the same patterns. Many people are shocked to see something like that when they start out, and to make it clear to myself and team members, I created this flowchart to help me with the decision on if I should extract patterns of utilities and how I should abstract them. So to me, it all starts with the question, does it exist only once in the source code? Meaning not the rendered output source to the browser, but the real source code you work with. If your set of utility classes exists only once in your source code, and if it can be built with the existing utilities Tailwind provides, then go ahead and build it with utilities. If, however, it does exist more than once in the source code, we run into the risk of having too much repetition happening in different places. So the question to me is it then feasible to abstract on the template layer? Meaning, is it possible to create a Vue or React component that abstracts the utility classes you put in there, or a Twig template, or whatever constraints of your system you're working with? If it is possible to do this abstraction on the template layer, meaning in markup while keeping the Tailwind utilities, then my advice is to also build it with existing utilities using template abstraction. Because only then you keep many of the benefits of a utility-first approach, among them avoiding the append-only CSS, avoiding having to switch contexts while developing, and also avoiding scope issues which you might introduce when creating CSS-based components. So these were the roads that lead to building with utilities. We have another one. If we answer the question, can it be built with existing utilities, with a no, we can answer then the question, but, well, could we build it if we created additional utilities? If it can be built with additional utilities, you can either create a Tailwind plugin or write your own utilities in your custom CSS. If we, however, are not able to abstract on the template layer, or if it's such a complicated CSS that it's not possible or that it's not feasible to recreate it using additional utilities, then the advice is to create a BEM component. Inside the BEM component, inside your CSS, you should use Tailwind's post CSS functions like add, apply, and theme to maintain consistency and reuse your existing design tokens from your Tailwind config. To get a practical sense of what we want to do here, we're going to create this simple card component and show various methods to abstract. So we will find out that the base version of this card is easily built with utilities only. We're going to find a way to create this black and white filter using a custom utility. And we'll look into how to use add apply to abstract our button component to be applied by using a single BEM named button class. To get started, I created a new project based on my Webpack starter, which you can find on GitHub if you want to. It's basically a Webpack configuration that compiles post CSS, adds Tailwind CSS, and processes nunchucks templates. After running npm install to get the dependencies, I can now run npm run dev to start a Webpack dev server with hot module reloading that renders my index nunchucks template. Let's see if I get rid of that heading and save it. You're gonna see the live update. And beneath my browser window, I like to open my design document to have a reference of what I'm going to be building. So I'm going to start creating this card component using utilities only. So I think I'll first need a wrapper that has overflow hidden, a medium rounded border radius. I'm using the overflow hidden that I don't have to add an additional border radius on the image, which I will put right inside. We'll make the image the full width, and let's just grab a random image of the correct dimensions from Unsplash. To get the dimensions, I'll just quickly check the Figma document, and I'm going to use twice the size of that document to have it display nicely on high density displays. So we need it in 600 by 350. If I paste that in, I always get a random image on each load in my desired dimensions. So let's just put it in here as the source. For now, let's see. All right, we got this full width image. Beneath it, we need a container which will contain our heading and our text. And this is gonna require some padding. Let's try it with a P4. And inside that, we gonna need the title. Welcome to focus within. Can't type. Followed by some lorem ipsum. See how that goes. Okay. If you wonder why I'm not restraining the width of the entire card component, I like to have my components be as context agnostic as possible, and I regard it as the job of the parent component that houses the cards to define their width. So later on, we're gonna arrange those cards in a grid-like structure, and then this grid is gonna define the max width of our component, and we want the component to just fill whatever its parent provides. So now we see there's something missing. We need a white background, and let's try the large box shadow. Looking good. And then we're gonna need a little bit of additional styling for our text. I happen to use Tailwind based colors already. So let's make it pink 600. Text pink 600. Font is bold. And text 24 pixels is 2XL. That's it. Pretty close. Let's give the paragraph a little margin top. And I think it's a lighter shade of gray. Yes. So it's text gray 600, 700. And that margin is too much. All right, looking good. So this is our card component. As long as we only have one of this card component, there's no problem having this set of utilities to define our card component. Of course, usually this is not how it's going to be. We're going to have more of those card components. So let's just simulate this real quick by duplicating it to have 3 cards. And to align them next to one another, we're going to add a wrapper that has a display flex. Now we have them aligned next to one another. I guess we could have our outer container a little bit wider to give it some space. And next up, I want to create some spacing between my cards, which I also don't consider a part of the card design. So I create an additional wrapper, adding a padding on the x-axis. That's not enough. All right, even more. And to accommodate for this padding X, I'll add a negative margin to the parent. So we are still flush with the page container. Just to make sure we always have thirds, we'll add a 1/3 width utility class. And now let's make this only happen on viewports that are wide enough to allow it. Need to make my window bigger, because right now this flex behavior is visible across all viewports, and I think it would make sense to start this on the medium-sized viewport. So we're gonna prefix our flex classes with the MD, and also the 1/3 classes and the padding. And now let's take this. I'm just gonna make a new duplication of this set of utilities and see what happens. Here we go. At the medium-sized viewport, we stack them beneath one another, and then we need some spacing between them only for the small viewports, which I'll just happen to put on the empty margin top 6, and on the medium-sized viewport we'll reset it again using empty 0. We could have achieved the same also by adding Tailwind's spacing utilities, which were relatively newly introduced. I've just not come around to like them as much. Something's wrong. I only added it to the first card wrapper. Here we go, fair enough. So we're pretty close to what we created here. So, but now we have created this sort of repetition. So if we wanted to make changes to any of those, we would have to do this in many places, which is not a good way to develop. Let's first take a second to think about what we actually want to achieve when we say we want to avoid repetition in our card component. First of all, what I want is to have this part of markup with the according classes abstracted away into its own partial. And then I need to figure out the parts of this component that are content that needs to be dynamically replaced. There we have the source of the image we want. In the real world, we'd also have the alt attribute additionally to be dynamically filled. And we have the title. And we have the actual teaser text. And to achieve this, we need to somehow put those information into a structured form that could be an array or an object. and iterate over it. And when we iterate over it, we could either write all the classes out or import our card component and pass the data into the component. Let's just prepare our template and import it and use it and prepare our data in a array. So I like to put my component templates separated from the rest inside a components folder, and then we just name it card. And let's create a array that I'll call card content, which will house all of our information for each of the cards. So we're going to have an array of objects, and we'll have a title, we'll have, I call it a description, and then finally we'll have the image URL, which I can take from down here. Put it in quotes. And let's just repeat this 2 times. So far nothing has changed, but we have some errors. I forgot the keyword to set a new variable in nunchucks. Another error. Oh wait, I wanted this to be an array. All right. Next up, I want to iterate over this. And I want my iteration to start inside the flex wrapper. Let's create a for loop. Let's make this plural. These are our card contents. And for card content in card contents, we want this div. Let's just put our card in here. And let's get rid of all the other hard-coded cards. So we only have the ones from our array. Oh, there's one more. So, but now we have hard-coded our content. We should be able to access the title using card content.title. Yes, there you see the emoji is there. And we have the other titles. And we can replace the description using card content.description. And also the image URL will be made dynamic. And now we can see I forgot a little thing on my card component. I want them to be equal height. So let's add a h full for height 100% to it, and it will expand to the entire height of the flex row. Now, as you can see, we don't have any more repetition. For every new item we add to our array of content, it's going to use the same markup and exists only once in the source code. However, it would be even nicer if we were to be able to use this sort of markup inside other templates. So what I want to do is abstract it away into a card component, which I already added, and then import this card component into my, in this case, index template, and fill it with the stuff I wanted to render. In Nunchucks, this is a little bit more complicated than I had anticipated, and I'm going to do it using macros. If you are using something like Vue, it's a lot simpler by passing the data using props into your components. With Trick, you could use the with keyword when including partials. But in Nunchucks, I haven't found a very straightforward way. Maybe if you know about one, let me know. What I'm going to do is create this macro. Inside here, we take the markup we want our card to have, which starts right here. Oops. Something's off. Forgot a closing div. Inside here, we have the card variable to access our card content as soon as we pass it in. Let's see. So I'm going to import the card component. No, it's templates, components. As let's call it card component. And then what we're going to do, instead of having this card components markup directly in here, is we render the card component, call the content macro, and pass it the card content of our current iteration of the for loop. And here we go. Now we are using the card components markup, which is extracted into the card Nunchucks template file, and pass it the data we define here in our structured array. And if we were to render these cards at any other place, we could just do the same, import our card component and render it. And if we ever decide we need to change something in our card component, this is going to cascade through to every instance that uses the card. We don't see the changes right now because as Webpack only processes files it knows about, I would have to somehow import the card component to make Webpack aware of what has happened here. So now we have it imported, and we immediately also get the hot reloading for the changes in this. So cool. This is, in my opinion, the best way to abstract component functionality by putting it into a dedicated template file, be it twig, nunchucks, view, whatever, and inside there make full use of the utilities you have at hand. All right, let's look at our design document and decide what to do next. We got this basic card component pretty much down. And next up, our design tells us that we want to show the image in a black and white version. What you can see here in the static images, I want the color to fade back in when you hover the card. If you were to look up Tailwind's documentation as of today, you wouldn't find any utilities to implement CSS filters, which is exactly what we need as the easiest way to achieve such a black and white effect. So my suggestion in this case is to create the utilities yourself in your custom CSS. What I like to do is create a new folder in my styles folder called utilities, and inside there put a separate CSS or post CSS file for any sort of utility I'm creating. I'll call this filters, because maybe I want to add other filters than only the black and white one. Let's name it explicitly filter grayscale, because this is what's going to happen if we apply this to an element. We want to use filter grayscale 100%. And when working with utilities and creating new ones, it's also always a good idea to think about how would I be able to undo the very thing that this filter does. And that's why I'll add another utility called filter reset, which does set the filter to none. This alone would be sufficient to make elements on the page black and white, but to make full use of Tailwind's post CSS features, I'm going to use the add variants directive and let Tailwind create variants of this utility for things like hover, group hover, focus, focus within, and responsive. What this means is we don't only get the utilities as we defined them, but Tailwind will generate classes such as hover, filter, grayscale, which you can then use to only apply the grayscale filter on hover, or use the responsive breakpoints to only make use of this utility at a certain breakpoint. And it's totally up to you which variants you want your custom utility to support. Let's try it. First of all, I need to import my newly created utility in my main style sheet. Say we want to make the image there we go, we have a black and white image. Say we want I named it filter reset. There we have it. Speaking of which, I think filter none is better in this case because it's more direct, telling me what it's doing. So let's really change that utility to filter none. I want the effect to appear when I hover the entire card, not only the image. And I also would like to have a little transition in there to make the fade smoother. The first problem we can address by adding a group class to the parent, to the entire card. And we change the hover to group hover, meaning essentially this is going to happen when the parent element that has the class of group applied is being hovered. So now we have it no matter where on the card we hover. And for the transition, we have also classes provided by Tailwind, which are composable by using the transition keyword, or I think we'll need to use transition all, because if you only use transition, it has a set of save to animate properties that will be transitioned, and filter is not amongst them. Then we define an easing, which I like to be ease in this case, and we define the duration. Let's try 200 milliseconds. And there you go. All right, what we have left to do is implement our button and create the promised abstraction within a BEM component in our style sheet. To do so, I first like to start by adding the data to one of our cards. So let's just call it link. And the link text is show details as per our design. And we have an href that is going to be my personal blog. And then we're going to check if we have an href in our card template. If card.link.href, and if then we want to create our button. Almost didn't see it, but there you have it, show details. This is what we need to be styling right now. A background of pink 500. Let's also immediately add a darker background on hover and on focus. Make it fully rounded. Add more horizontal padding than vertical padding. Make the text white. Oh, and of course we shouldn't be putting this into our href attribute. There belongs the data of our card link href. And let's put the classes on a new line. When these attributes get longish, I like to put it in a view like indentation. Okay, that's not too bad already. Let's make it text small, uppercase, tracking wide. And I think it's a little bit too much vertical padding. So let's reduce it a number. And let's make this inline block. As we use a system font stack, we have all the width, all the font weights we can imagine. And let's add some spacing to the top. I want this to have a little transition as well. So let's add transition. We don't need all in this case because we only want the background color to transition, and that's by default when using the transition keyword. And let's also add an ease in and a duration of 200 milliseconds as well. And it's smoother. So oftentimes you find yourself, or at least I, in a situation where I need this kind of tiny user interface abstraction to be used with only a single class name. For example, if my rich text editor in a content management system allows me to only add a class and not introduce new markup components. So what I like in this case is to create a classic BAM component, which I would use the name prefix C for component to make my components distinguishable from utilities and other types of CSS, and call it what it is, a button or a button styled link. This alone does nothing, so let's create the style sheet for it. I create in my styles directory a components subdirectory, and inside of this I put the button PCSS, and all I have to do now is write my desired class name, write the add apply directive, and stitch together all the class names. And of course we need to import this newly created component. And there we have an error, which is likely to be because up until Tailwind 1.7 it was not possible to use these variants inside an add apply rule. Let's see if that's the problem. Yes. So what you would have to do is create your hover and focus and whatever variant styles by not using the hover prefix, but manually writing the pseudo selector and then applying whatever you want to have on hover, and the same with on focus. So if we do it like that, we get our hover and focus effects. As I said, with Tailwind 1.7 this has changed, but it's not enough to update to Tailwind 1.7. You also have to update your Tailwind config to enable the feature, because it's considered experimental at this point in time. So let me quickly check my Tailwind version right here. It's 1.7, that's good. And let's look up what flag we need to add to our config. We have to enable experimental all in our Tailwind config. So let's see. Remove those. Waiting for Webpack. And here we go. We can use focus colon for the focus color and the media query prefixes and all the nice variants you get from Tailwind. You can put directly into add apply, starting with Tailwind 1.7 if you enable the experimental features within your Tailwind config. So that's about it. We created our card component, extracted the utilities into a separate card partial. We added our own custom utility to create the grayscale effect. We made use of Tailwind's group hover feature to enable the effect on the image when hovering the entire card. And last but not least, we created a simple button component and extracted the CSS into a BAM CSS component that we can use anywhere where we are only able to add classes to existing markup. I hope you enjoyed it and looking forward for the next video.